So the recording's on. Hello and welcome, and it is really nice. Or joking aside, we've just been teasing Stef a little bit, but it's actually really lovely to catch up with you. And you are going to be one of the speakers at our conference here in North Devon in November.
Yay!
So just in case anyone who's watching this doesn't really know who you are or much about you, can you introduce yourself please and tell us a little bit about you?
Ooh, okay.
Our conference maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I can say.
So
Cybichowski.
I'm Stef, and I have an unpronounceable second name, which is why it doesn't appear on the screen. Yeah, so I am for my sins, a 3 principles trainer, coach, speaker, facilitator, whatever word they put. But I basically just share this understanding, and I've been doing it for about 6 years now, and I've been so lucky to get the opportunity to share the principles all over the world with different groups of people. So I speak to businesses. I speak in schools with children and teachers and parents. I speak to the military with ex-military veterans who have PTSD. So there's a whole range of people that benefit from this conversation, not just people who are looking for their own well-being, but for people who are looking to create something in the world. But the most beautiful thing about it is that when people begin to just see a tiny glimpse of what we talk about, they have a richer, deeper experience of life, and they settle down, and life seems to unfold in a much more graceful way for them, and life gets kind of easier. So it's been an amazing journey for me. I just absolutely love what I do. It doesn't feel like work at all. I get to see people change before my eyes. It's beautiful. So that's me.
So you were at our conference last year. You were one of the speakers there. What could you tell anyone, if there's somebody kind of watching this and they're sort of thinking, well, I don't really know what a conference might be like, and I'm not really sure whether I want to go or what to expect. So what would you say to somebody who's kind of in that place?
Oh, good question.
Apart from obviously get your ticket and come,
Obviously, yeah. I just think that there are so many people that I've met over the last 6 years that started off their journey, their adventure with the principles by attending a conference. I've been lucky to sort of attend quite a few conferences over the years, and I remember my first time actually being able to sit with the speakers in the same room, and instead of it being on video or being on a book or on an audio, you get the opportunity to get a sense of the feeling in the room. At conferences, and particularly the North Devon conference, I have found there is such a feeling of welcome and love and kindness that everybody is feel, as soon as they walk in the room, they get a sense of the companionship and the beautiful experience that the conference gives us. So for me, it's a combination of getting a sense of that connection with people, that kind of loving connection with people, where it doesn't matter where you come from or what your understanding of the principles is, or if you have no understanding at all, you are welcomed. And as well as the connection with people, what happens is that you get the opportunity to speak to lots of different people at different levels of their understanding, and you get to ask questions, and you get to get a sense of what it is that the speakers are talking about, hopefully what I'm talking about. But it's so open and it's so friendly, and there is such a community to it that, I mean, I go to conferences every year, and I see people who have been coming to different conferences for years, and people just love the sense of community. They love the sense of connection they get with people, and of course they love the conversation. They love the opportunity to get a sense of what life is really about, get a sense of who they really are. And once they begin that journey, then there is no end to it. There is no I've learnt that. So the conversation carries on, and it gets deeper, and the relationships with people around you that become friends and become really good adventurers along the way. There's such a community to it, and the Deb and Beck have put together a conference that is not, it's not stodgy. It's not this person is more important than this person. Everybody has the opportunity to talk. Everybody has the opportunity to answer questions and to show what they've seen. And so it's a unique experience in my book. It's I don't think there's a conference like it anywhere else. It's certainly my favourite one.
Oh.
Thank you.
So when you were kind of sharing that was really lovely, thank you. You pointed out, you talked about this understanding and this conversation and these principles. Can you just share a little bit about what that means? There'll be some people probably listening to this that won't know what that is. So can you share a little bit about what that is for people?
Okay, I'll try and make it brief.
Yeah, please.
we are talking about this over 3 days in a conference.
Yeah.
Just a briefing.
Okay, so for me, when I first came to this understanding, I was in a pretty tough spot in my life, and I was without hope. I had very, very low self-esteem, and I couldn't really see how life could be as good again. And what I saw very, very quickly, actually, it didn't take too long. What I saw when I first started hearing people speak about this was this understanding gives us an idea, gives us an alternative view of where our experience is coming from, where our feelings come from, where our emotions come from, as opposed to what we've always been taught, the place that we think our feelings come from. So for me, what I saw was that when I saw that the idea that I had in my mind about me was not necessarily true. The idea that I'd had, the conditioning that I'd had, the psychology that had built up over the years about how unworthy I was and how dumb I was and how I never could make a success of anything, I began to see that I'd created that with my thought. I created that with my thinking. I had created a story about my life, as everybody does. I created a story about my life and about me, and it wasn't true. So what I saw for me, and what I see with everybody, is that we all live in this little tiny box that we create, that we say, this is me, this is what I'm capable of, this is what I can expect in my life. I am never, ever going to get anything different other than this tiny little box of possibilities. What I saw was that when I began to see that my story wasn't true, the idea of myself, the beliefs and the constructs I had about the limitations that I had weren't true, it freed my mind of all the limitations. I began to see that there was a whole world of possibilities. As soon as my mind was free of my own self-judgment and criticism and ideas about what I was capable of, I saw so many possibilities in life that I could follow, and I could create what I wanted to create, and I could create the me that wanted to do the creation. I could make myself into the person that exercises in the morning or kind of does his accounts on time. And that's not fixed. I didn't know that. I never knew that I wasn't this person that I made myself up to be. And as soon as I saw that, life opened up for me. I began seeing possibilities to do all sorts of things in music and in sharing the principles, in relationships that weren't available to me when I was stuck in this little box that I'd made for myself. And the possibilities for every area in our life, you know, I began to see that I not only had a story about me, but I had a story about other people as well. You know, I had a story about my dad and my sister and my wife, and it became really interesting to me to see what life could be like if I showed up in this moment without, not only without my story, but without other people's stories as well. What would happen if I showed up to my girlfriend without the noise that I had and just experienced her in that moment? And I can tell you, it's like falling in love every day. It's like that honeymoon period, you know, and you can have that with everybody. So for me, what is on the table for people at this conference is the most powerful, transformative, important thing anybody could learn, which is why I do the work in schools. Because if kids can begin to see it at an earlier age, then they don't spend all their life creating this psychology and this idea of themselves that they then have to undo at a later date. So I don't think that there is no more important conversation than an understanding of where our experience comes from and who we really are beyond what we make up.
So what would you say to somebody who is thinking of coming to this conference, but they're listening to this and kind of saying, yeah, I get about stories and that kind of thing, but I've actually got a physical illness, or I've got a mental illness, and it's not a story, and you know, I'm not sure if this is going to help me?
So what I've seen, and I've worked with clinical schizophrenics, I've worked with clinical depressives. I was clinically depressed for a number of years. And I would say that regardless of whatever suffering we experience in life, we can have a different experience of illness. The illness doesn't necessarily dictate the possibility for having a richer, deeper experience of life. And I see that every day. When people begin to see how their experience of their illness is being created, not their illness itself. We know that that's true. But when they can see that there's a difference between the symptoms of an illness and our experience of the symptoms of an illness, what happens is their mind begins to slow down around it. And as our mind slows down, again, it's the same thing as the story. As our mind quietens, as it naturally begins to settle down, we experience a freedom of mind that allows us to see and feel different experiences of everything in life. For me personally, I was depressive suicidal, and this understanding has not necessarily made the depression disappear. It's just that I have a different relationship to it now. That's what's on the table, is that you can have a very, very debilitating illness, but there is the possibility that you can have a completely different relationship to it, a much better relationship to it, a much better experience of it. So I would say, if you count yourself as one of those people, then this conference is the place to go, because you can see that underneath your experience of the illness, you are okay. You're okay.
Anything else on that?
Oh, that was just really powerful. I went right into that really quiet space that we talk about. So I guess my kind of question then would be, because we've gone out a lot around mental health and well-being, and we I think you kind of touched on principles and this understanding. Where for you have you seen, I don't know, maybe got a particular story, because I think you talked about war veterans and things like that. Where have you really seen a big shift in someone, maybe a kind of example story? I think people really can resonate when they hear somebody's something that you've seen that's changed for somebody in a personal kind of story, without obviously sharing anything that would identify an individual. But maybe
names and addresses supplied.
Yeah, go on, tell us. No, but just maybe just a kind of personal story of transformation that you've seen around kind of mental health and trauma and that sort of thing.
So yeah, I spoke about doing some work with military veterans, and I and another couple of guys that do this same work were invited to a weekend for it was like a Help for Heroes thing, where they had, I think there was about 50 veterans there with their wives and families, and there was discussion about mental health, and they gave an idea of what they'd been through, and some of them had been through the most. I mean, I can't imagine the trauma that they'd actually experienced, and some of them, were without limbs, and some of them had head injuries, and some of them, and they'd been let out of the military basically because they weren't capable of performing the job. So they were left in a place where they kind of didn't have a home anymore. Everything that they'd trained for, everything that they'd, all their friends and comrades that they'd worked with for years in some really tough situations, all of a sudden they found themselves on the outside. So therefore, they had, a lot of them had different degrees of what they call post-traumatic syndrome. And the thing about this weekend was that I got to see how it also affected their families, how it affected their wives and girlfriends. And there were so many of them that had such difficult relationships. And with the traditional psychiatry and the therapies that they'd been through, these guys had been told that they would always have the symptoms that they experienced, and it would be just a question of managing them. There was one guy who was sitting about, I don't know, 10 feet away from me as I began to speak. This is like the beginning of the day. I began to speak. And this guy stood up and he said, I don't know what you're going to say, but he said, all I know is that when I get triggered, all I want to do is take a pencil and bury it in somebody's neck. And I kind of stood there like, oh, okay. But he was just trying to give me an idea of just what they were all up against in their own ways. And so traditional psychiatry, one of the things that they'd been through as part of their therapy was, for some people that had been in explosions and stuff, and they'd been. It's a really good idea of what sometimes psychiatry can do, is it can try and take you back to the cause of your trauma, with the idea of kind of picking it apart to the point where if you pick it apart enough, you will see something which will help with the experience today. And one of the things that one of the therapies they had was they built a simulator of a military vehicle that was being blown up. So they were in this military vehicle that was being blown up with body parts flying around. And you can imagine that took them, that triggered them, and that didn't help at all. But that was the accepted idea of the therapeutic model, was to take them back. So we began to have, we did a presentation, then we did some one-to-one coaching with them over the next 2 or 3 days, and we began to explain to them where their experience was coming from and how the past relates to now, and how it is possible to have an experience of life where you don't have to keep reliving that same memory, that same trauma. And we did the same thing separately with the wives and girlfriends. We kind of explained what was going on with their thought processes. And after the 3 days, we had probably about 40 out of the 50 guys had seen something very, very deep about their triggering, about what was creating their experience in the moment, and it wasn't what they thought it was. It was we kept going back month after month. We had a program of about 6 months, and we spent 6 months with one-to-one sessions with these guys and their girlfriends. And they, at the end of the 6 months, I guess there were probably about 15 of the worst cases out of the 50 they came to us with the last session we had was with their other halves, and sometimes their children. And what they said to us over that last weekend was that we had what they'd seen in this conversation had not only dramatically reduced the number of their triggerings, but it also lowered the level of the fear they had over it. So they weren't living what we would call a normal life. They were still very, very nervous, but it enabled them to settle down enough. It enabled them to find their own well-being enough to have, and this was the best bit, was that they had begun to have a normal relationship with their partner again, and with their family. And there were so many of them that were at breaking point before the 6 months started. So what they also said was they began to see that it wasn't a life sentence. They could see how far they'd come in the 6 months, and they could see that what they'd been told, that it was only something that they would have to learn to cope with, wasn't necessarily true. There was hope and there was possibility where there had been none before. And there was a family. They were, they got new relationships with their kids. So that has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've had. Because, like I say, it really does change people's lives, It transforms people's experience of life. they began to see something about themselves that was so much bigger than they had been taught to believe, they'd been trained to believe with their conditioning. That is why this conversation is so cool.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really looking forward to more stories and conversations like this.
So I just wondered, before we kind of wrap up today, if anyone who is on the call would like to ask Stef a question. I'm sure you don't mind. So I don't know. I think you can put your hand up or unmute yourself or whatever. So if there is anyone who is on the call who has got something that they would like to ask Stef, either about the understanding or about the conference itself, please feel free to jump in. That's where everyone just goes quiet.
Yeah. And while we're waiting to see if that's happening, where we're going to post this video in a few places, and wherever we post it, there'll be information about how to get tickets for the conference, because obviously you want to come and listen to Stef some more.
He's even better in real life.
Yeah. And next Tuesday the 27th, we've got our next Meet the Speaker conversation with Frederick Kinman. And that's, I think, 6 p.m. UK time. So we'll also share some information about joining in with that if you'd like to. So it doesn't look like anyone's unmuted or put their hands up. So I think you've told them everything they wanted to know for today's Stef. Thanks for that.
They're just going to go where buy their tickets, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
I think that's.
Yeah, it was really lovely to catch up with you, and we are so excited. We just can't wait. As you know,
me too. I just want to say thank you for inviting me. It's
no problem.
it is my favourite conference. So
Yay!
it's ours too. It was. It blew our mind last year. It was so special. You know, literally, it was just, it was unbelievable. And I just can't wait to do it all again.
I know, it's going to be
thank you
soon.
So much for your time, Stef.
Yeah, thanks
it was really great. And thank you everyone who joined us. I hope there was something useful there for you. And we will see you all again soon.
See you all in November.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.